Hi, Chef. This is our presentation on the bear claws. I'm Hannah,
I'm Abby.
and we're gonna talk about what we did. We're gonna talk about what we did. Okay, so first I'm gonna go over generally what we did throughout the entirety of our 4 days in the lab. Our goal was to successfully create a bear claw that is considered more healthy than the original recipe by using fat alternatives, incorporating whole grains, and reducing the calories of the total product. We conducted research through multiple trials of this. We did three different trials of the bear claw because we were only able to do one batch a day because of the overnight wait period. And we did that. We changed different things in each component of the pastry throughout. We also took photographs of the progress of our different trials, which we will see later in the PowerPoint. And we took 3 different surveys with our classmates and also with the public. We were lucky enough to stumble upon a tour and the students from the Singapore campus that gave us some great feedback on what they liked, what they didn't like, and how they felt about our product overall. Our major findings from this presentation and experiment were that chia was a great egg replacer for what we were trying to accomplish. We did this by doing a 4-to-1 ratio of chia seeds to water, and then we let it sit for a couple minutes until it got gloopy and slimy, and then we grinded it up in the spice grinder in order to create a great egg replacer. We also discovered that combining fats and fat alternatives to replace the butter block was a great way to still get that buttery sort of flavor, but also reduce the fat and calories. One thing that we added was chickpea, which also went along with our principle from the the resource that you gave us, the principles of healthy living, I think it was. Uh, we use that as a parameter for incorporating legumes and nuts into our product.
The topic of this assignment was to create a healthful leavened breakfast pastry based on a brief that required having parameters of 25% daily value of saturated fat, 10 grams or less of sugar, 320 milligrams or less of sodium, 50% whole grain based off of the flour weight, 350 calories, and a 3-ounce baked weight. Some history on the bear claw is that it originated in the 1920s in the United States, and the core ingredients for the dough consist of flour, sugar, butter, and eggs, while the filling consists of almonds, egg whites, sugar, and almond extract. One challenge we faced was with the modified butter blocks and laminating them into the dough. The first time we made our butter block mixtures, we incorporated all the ingredients together and then shaped them to fit the size of our dough block and then refrigerated them. We found by doing this it caused our butter block to crumble and leave chunks of butter throughout the dough instead of nice smooth layers. Upon talking to Chef Brown to direct us toward a solution, he stated that the temperature of the butter block should be between 57 and 62 degrees Fahrenheit during lamination to help make everything smooth and fold in better. Another challenge we faced was with recreating the almond filling and making it still taste good. Our first fillings were made with chickpea to replace the almond paste and flax meal and water to replace the eggs. We added almond extract to aid in tasting like almond. However, the flax in combination with the added extract created a strong, unpleasant flavor that wasn't desirable for our final products. After conducting nutritional analysis in ESHA, we discovered that we had room with the parameters to utilize actual almond paste in our filling to pull through the almond flavor. From here, we changed the flax to chia, which ended up leaving us with a closer flavor to the control filling.
So a part of our presentation was to focus our modifications to our baked good on a couple principles from the Principles of Healthy and Sustainable Menus, which Chef provided us with. The two we decided to focus on were making our product more legume and forward and reimagining dairy in a supporting role. The ways we did this was we incorporated chickpea as a third of our butter replacement in the butter block of the Danish dough. We also included almond paste as our main flavor source in our filling of our bear claw. instead of other replacements that we tested that you'll see later. Then also for the reimagining dairy in a supporting role, we used yogurt as a fat replacer or a butter replacer in literally every single aspect of our product. We used it as a butter replacer in the dough, and we also used it as a third of the butter replacer in the butter block, or the quote, I'm air quoting, butter block. And then we used it as a fat replacer in our almond filling as well. These are our cited sources for our abstract and the rest of the presentation as well. Our problem statement for this experiment was, how can we effectively create a bear claw pastry that is considered healthful by using fat alternatives, incorporating whole grains, and reducing calories? Our hypothesis for this presentation and experiment was, by replacing high in fat ingredients, substituting bread flour for whole grain flour, reducing the calories, and reinventing the presentation, we will transform the bear claw into a better for you breakfast pastry. Our independent or manipulated variable for this presentation and experiment was that we created a bear claw that has no more than 25% daily value from saturated fat, no more than 10 grams of sugar, no artificial sweeteners, and no more than 320 milligrams of sodium. It also has about 50% of total flour weight using whole grains or whole grain flour, and it does not exceed 350 calories, all within a at least 3-ounce portion. Our portion was about 4 ounces, but the parameters were for it to be at least 3 ounces. Our dependent variables for this experiment were that we took photographs of our product. We took photographs of the base doughs after their first bulk ferment. We did this because, I'll go in more in depth later, but we did this so we could sort of predict how the structure of the pastry would be before we even baked it off. We also took pictures of the whole pastries, once they were done without the powdered sugar, so we could see the color. So that way we could compare color, size, shape, how much the filling spread out, things like that. We also cut the pastries in half, and that way we took pictures of them cut in half so that we could analyze the crumb structure and the color of the filling on the inside. We also did 3 separate surveys throughout our experimental process, which we surveyed the public and we also surveyed our classmates. We asked questions about the flavor of the pastry, the visual appearance of the pastry, and the texture of the pastry, and we also left a space for the people who took the questionnaire to give their own comments and extra thoughts that might help us. So what we kept the same from our control recipe was that we kept the quantity of the flour, the salt, the sugar, and the yeast in the Danish dough consistent to the control formula. The flour, the quantity was the same, but we did change the type of flour. We also kept the quantity of the liquid added to the Danish dough the same. We changed the liquids, but we kept the quantity the same. The butter block ratio to the dough was kept the same. However, we did replace most of the butter with other alternatives. And lastly, we used almond paste in the filling in order to make sure that the almond flavor is prominent throughout the pastry, which was also originally in the control formula. We just added other replacements to help make it healthier.
Some materials and ingredients we utilize that aren't considered typical are a Roboku, a spice grinder, proof box, chickpeas, Greek yogurt, type 85 whole wheat, bread flour, and chia seeds. These are the formulas we based our modifications on. In our first trial for the bear claw, we changed the eggs from whole eggs to 12 grams of yolks and 59 grams of whites in the dough to reduce fat and calories. We changed part of the flour to type 85 to meet the flour weight requirement. We replaced half the milk with water and replaced the butter with yogurt to reduce both fat and calories. Same principles apply for the butter block and filling, where we substituted a third of the block to yogurt and a third of the block to chickpea. For the almond paste, we tried using chickpea with extract in its place to go along with our healthy principle of using beans and legumes. For our second trial, we kept the eggs and the flour the same as trial 1, but changed the milk to all water and the butter to all mashed chickpea. For the block, we changed the third of butter to Sweetex. We tried this before using Esha, and we were hoping it would bring down our saturated fat amount and calories, but discovered it increased the calories instead of lowering them. For the filling, we kept the chickpea with the extract and the flax meal replacement the same as trial 1, but changed the butter to oil. We hoped it would be lower in fat and calories than the butter, but discovered it increased instead of decreased. For our third trial, we kept the milk, water, yogurt, and eggs the same as trial 1. We changed the flour to type 85 to meet the flour weight requirement and split the remainder between bread flour and almond flour in hopes of bringing through more almond flavor. In the block, we kept the yogurt the same from trial 1, changed the chickpea to lentil, and used half butter, half almond butter, also to pull through more almond flavor. For filling 3, we kept the basis of the control with almond paste and the cake flour, but used chia seed and water as egg replacement and yogurt as butter replacement. For filling 4, we kept the control basis with the cake flour and almond paste, but used applesauce as egg replacement and yogurt as butter. We added 20 grams of cake flour to make the filling pipeable. The applesauce ended up increasing our sugar count by 2 grams due to the fructose, but we didn't end up using this filling in the end, as filling 3 was preferred according to our survey results. After all of the trials and data collection, we ended up using our first dough and our first butter block, but in a softened version, so it laminated better, and our third filling in our final product. These are our nutrition facts for both the control and the healthy version that we ended with. We were able to reduce the calories from 540 to 250. We were able to reduce the saturated fat from 20 grams to 5 grams. We were able to keep the sodium and the sugar the same in both the control and the final product.
Like I said before, we collected data by taking photographs and by surveying people. So our first set of photographs is of the dough after its first bulk ferment. The photo on your left is of the control dough. Unfortunately, did not get a photo of the dough from the side like I did the other ones, but it did poof up like a normal dough should have. Photos on your right are of our first modification, which had butter replaced to yogurt. It had the increase in whites and less yolks. It had the whole wheat flour added to it, and we replaced half of the milk in the recipe with water. As you can see, the color changed a bit. You can see the fleckies from the whole wheat flour, and it also did not rise as much as the control dough did. We took these photos mainly to predict how the dough would be after we baked it, to sort of predict how the yeast would react and how much structure the dough could handle. The second set of photos is of our modification 2 dough after its bulk ferment. As you can see, it rose about the same as the modification 1. The only difference between this one and the modification 1 was, as a butter replacer, we used chickpea, and we used all water instead of half milk and half water in the formula. Like I said before, the color's the same. It rose about the same, so there wasn't too much of a difference between the two at this stage. However, we ended up having to pull this one out of the running for our final, because after we put it into ECHA, we discovered that it was very much out of the parameters of the health requirements, so we had to say goodbye to modification 2 dough. Our last trial of dough was our dough number 3 modification. This modification was pretty much exactly the same as the dough number 1 modification. However, we replaced the portion of bread flour with half almond flour and half bread flour in order to attempt to add more almond flavor to the dough itself. This dough did not rise nearly as much as the other ones, as you can see by the photos. It also has a little bit of a different color. It's a little more yellowy brown, not super drastic, but you can see it a little bit in there. It also was much more sticky than the other 2 doughs, as you can see by the little pulled up parts on the right side of the photo on the left, or the left side of the photo on the left. So that was something we found interesting, and we think it's because of the lack of gluten in the almond flour, so there wasn't as much structure to hold the gas that was produced in the ferment. These are the results of our first set of surveys we sent out. This was mostly just from the class. We did not get too many people from the public to take this survey, unfortunately. But we had a visual appeal of about a 3.8, which is meets the requirements, but not exactly as high as we wanted. The texture was not great, according to the people who ate our pastry. Um, they thought it was a little maybe chewy. We got some comments about the texture. Taste was also really bad. The filling was a chickpea almond extract filling that with the addition of flax as an egg replacer, and it was not very tasty. We had many people spit it out as they tasted it. So overall, off of this data, we determined that the dough was okay. It wasn't amazing. The texture comment more came from the texture of the filling because it was very squelchy and like not pleasant. However, the dough was okay. The flavor and the texture of the filling was strange, so we 86 the chickpea idea after we played with Esha a little bit. Um, and we also determined that we needed to add a little bit more sweetness into our filling, mostly because there was no sugar, and the almond extract really added a like fake bittery, just not good flavor overall. So we started from the drawing board with the filling after this data collection. So our second set of photographs we took as a data collection was of our final product as a whole and cut in half. So we have our control, which is our formula that you saw earlier in the PowerPoint, and then we have our modification 1 and our modification 2. The butter block for our modification 1 had a mixture of uh, chickpea mash, butter, and yogurt. It was equal parts of each. And then our modification 2 butter block had equal parts Sweetex, yogurt, and chickpea inside. Then the filling for our modification 1 was made up of chickpea almond extract and flaxseed, and then our filling for our modification number 2 was made up of flaxseed oil and with almond extract. Um, as you can see, there's some spillage on the side of the filling, so it didn't act as much like very well as well as we would have liked it to. Also, the colors are very off from the addition of the flaxseed, and like we said before, the flavor of the filling was not pleasant in the slightest. So after this test, we decided to rethink the filling as a whole. When it comes to the lamination, as you can see in the photo on the left, they once again didn't have as nice of a lamination and they didn't poof up as much as the control. We sort of attest this to the fact that we chilled our butter blocks in order to make them solid before we rolled them into the dough. And that caused the butter block to crumble as we rolled it in, and it didn't create the layers of butter, it created more chunks of butter, so there wasn't the layers to poof as there would have normally been in the control bear claw. So this is our second set of photographs of our finished products from our second testing day. The Danish on the right has the Danish dough, the original Danish dough #1 formula. The only thing we changed in this Danish dough was that we kept the butter block at a room temperature, so it was more of a spreadable consistency than a solid block. This made the lamination a lot better because the butter was able to layer into the dough instead of just crumble up and create little pockets of fat throughout the dough. So it poofed up a lot nicer, as you can see in the cross-section photo there, than the original version of this dough. Then the dough on the right Danish was the #3 dough that had the addition of almond flour into it. As you can see in the photos, it baked a lot darker than the dough #1, and it also did not rise nearly as much as all of our other trials. We sort of blame this on the lack of gluten in the almond flour, so there wasn't enough structure for the gas to hold on to in the baking process. The fillings were a completely new creation that we came up with after playing around with Esha and our disaster of our first filling. So the dough #3, or not the dough #3, the first one on the left, the one with dough #1, has a filling made of chia in replacement of eggs, yogurt in replacement of butter, and almond paste like the original recipe. So we got that lovely almond flavor through natural almonds, which goes along with our principle from the healthy principles in the prior mentioned prior in the presentation. And then the filling on our dough number 3 Danish is made up of yogurt. We added a little extra flour because there was some extra moisture from the yogurt, and the applesauce. We had the addition of applesauce in there as an egg replacer, and then also the almond paste for the almond flavor. As you can see, the chia one created sort of a gray, funky color, but the texture and the flavor of it was pleasant. And the one on the dough number 3, the darker Danish, has a color the most similar to the control that we saw, but the flavor was not exactly what everybody was going for. So this is our final Danish that we ended up with the powdered sugar on it, so you can see the lovely presentation that we presented with Chef. I mean, well, Chef's the only one watching this, so he already saw it, but you get to see it again because we were that proud of it. It is the variation from our third test, which is the dough number 1 and the chia-based filling. It got the best reviews in the survey. People really enjoyed it. We felt it had the best flavor, even though the color was a little off. And the lamination clearly was superior to all of our other dough experiments. So that's what we ended up with. And we have the lovely little bear to present it to you again in a little bit more of a fancy fashion than we did in the bake shop. So this is our data we collected through the surveys after our second test of the Danishes. So we have the one that ended up being our final and the one with the lentils added into it. This is the data we got off of those two. The visual appeal went up. All the scores went up on the texture and the taste and the visual appeal, so that is a good sign that people enjoyed it better. And some tips we got for this one was that the original dough variation was preferred, which is why we went with it, and that the flavor of the almond filling was much more improved from the prior test. We also determined that we wanted to allow them to get a little bit darker in the oven because we got some notes that the dough felt a little underdone. And then we had a survey of a tour, and everybody told us that they were too healthy, but that they still tasted good. So we took that as a compliment, and which guided us to go along with the one we chose for our final. So this is our final survey, the data from our final survey that we collected on our last day allotted for this project, which was the Monday. This was the survey we took based off of our final product, the one that we presented to you. We got some data from our class, and we also got our data from some public and also a bunch of students from the Singapore campus, which was a lovely surprise to get them to survey. As you can see, the visual appearance went up by 0.2 points, from 4.2 to 4.4. We feel this is because we were able to refine the dough a little bit more. We got to do it again. The texture also went up from a 3.9 to a 4.2, and I believe this is because we left it in the oven a little longer, so it didn't have that doughy texture that people were talking about the last time. And the taste stayed consistent, 3.9 across the board, which is good enough. You know, it's for the requirements, it tasted pretty good in our opinion and everybody else's opinion. Some comments we got were that the pastry could be flakier, which is something that we could work on in the future to help improve. Also, the public was asking for more almond flavor, which I feel we could do if we were to test this again. And they also said that the texture of the filling was a bit strange compared to the original one, which is, to be expected. They said it was a little squelchy, a little like gummier than the original one, which we feel is due to the chia replacement instead of the egg. But overall, we're proud with what we came up with, and the data proves that what we made was actually tasty, which was one of the requirements. So that's good. Okay, so in conclusion, our goal was to investigate and create a bear claw pastry that is considered healthier for you by using fat alternatives, incorporating whole grains, and reducing the calories. Was our hypothesis supported by the data? Yes and no. Our hypothesis, I'm about to quote our hypothesis right now, was by replacing high-fat ingredients, substituting bread flour for whole grain flour, reducing the calories, and re-innovating the presentation, we will transform the bear claw into a better-for-you breakfast pastry. We were successful. in doing all of the healthy requirements needed, like substituting bread flour for whole grain flour and reducing the calories. However, we did not reinvent the presentation. That sort of got lost in our timeline. We ran out of time in order to make it look a little fancier or anything. The only thing we really did was replace the glaze with powdered sugar, which we could have. We didn't have the time in order to test out a glaze, unfortunately. So we did support the data with our hypothesis, or our data supported our hypothesis, sort of, but also there was that one factor that we mentioned that we ran out of time to test. Unfortunately, we're very sorry. That's all. So some of our major findings that we discovered in this experiment were that chia seeds were a really good egg replacement for our purposes in the almond filling. What we did was we soaked chia seeds in a 4-to-1 ratio of water to chia seeds. We soaked them in there until they were slimy and not like soupy and wet anymore. Then we took a spice grinder and we blitzed them up in the spice grinder until it was like a smooth, gray, sort of snotty paste. Looked really gross at first, but it resembled the texture of eggs. This worked really well for our purposes. It was the most similar to the egg that we could find in our time. One explanation that we can offer was that we originally, like we said before, used flaxseed as an egg replacer, which is what we found in this quote from How Baking Works. They suggested using flaxseed, so we tried that out. But it added that nutty flavor, like it said in the second quote that I put down there, which did not mix well with the almond flour, with the almond extract flavor. So we just decided to get rid of that entirely. So we went to Chef, and he suggested using chia seeds because they act very similar to flax seeds when they're soaked in water. And we tried it, and it worked really well. So that was with that. Another finding we found was that when you're laminating with alternative fats other than butter, it is important to keep them at the temperature that the butter block would be at, or this like at least a similar consistency. So this was also a tip coming from Jeff Brown because we were talking to him about our findings with the cold chunky butter in the first test of dough number 1, and he suggested that we leave it out at room temperature and sort of spread it into the dough instead of folding in chunky cold butter, or butter, not really butter, but partially butter. So we appreciate Jeff Brown's help in these decisions. And that was our main findings that we can take away and use in the future. And that really helped us develop our product to be as good as it was.
The filling that was preferred the most from our data was the one with the chia because of the flavor it provided. However, the chia caused there to be more of a gray color rather than a pale color like the control. If we were to do this again, we would substitute half chia and half applesauce for the egg replacement to decrease the gray color and pull through some sweetness from the fructose in the applesauce. The added moisture of the aquafaba from the chickpeas and from the Greek yogurt affected how the texture of our dough came out. If we were to do this again, we would find a way to remove the excess moisture to result in a more flaky dough versus a chewy dough. Our shaping wasn't on par compared to a normal bear claw because we've never done this before. If we were to do this again, we would take better care of fitting the size parameters when rolling out the dough to assemble the bear claws. Our surveys indicated that people wanted more sweetness. If we were to do this again, we would add some sort of no sugar added fruit-based glaze to pull through more sweetness.
Okay, so some ways we can apply what we learned to the real world and to our future careers is that through some research, we determined and solidified our thoughts that cholesterol issues are a big thing in America. Like it says in this quote here, nearly 94 million U.S. adults aged 20 or older have cholesterol levels higher than 200 milligrams. And I looked up a healthy cholesterol level, and a healthy cholesterol level is less than 100 milligrams per DL, whatever that measurement means. So that is very high cholesterol and is not healthy and can cause things like heart attacks and heart disease, strokes, all that nasty stuff that Americans struggle with. So lowering the levels of saturated fat by replacing butter and other forms of saturated fat in your baked good are a real good way to help people with high cholesterol still enjoy your delicious baked goods. I know personally, my father struggles with high cholesterol. I've had scares with high cholesterol, so this is a good tactic to have in my back pocket so that if, God forbid, my cholesterol or anyone else in my family's cholesterol gets worse, I can still give them yummy baked goods. Um, some other benefits that we learned was the addition of the whole grain flour. When you refine a grain, it strips all of the good for you fiber and nutrients from that grain. So adding those whole grains back in just puts more of the good stuff in without really changing the taste or texture that much. I know we didn't really get many comments saying that it was a weedy flavor or like a granola-y kind of vibe. So I feel that's a really easy way to just get more of the good nutrients and fiber into your diet while still enjoying yummy, delicious sweets because everybody loves sweets.
These are the questions that we came up with, which I just explained through our extension. We want to create a flakier pastry, prevent the bright color of the filling, and add more sweetness without using forms of glucose.
And that's the end. We put a little bear in the corner for you to represent you grading our paper because we thought that was funny. Um, so thank you for sitting through our presentation. I hope it was a little exciting. We tried to make it exciting with our addition of the bears because I keep on theme, you know. Enjoy. Have a good rest of your day, Chef. I hope you, yeah. Thanks. Bye.